The polished wood of the witness stand gleamed under the sterile courtroom lights, a cruel spotlight on a life imploding. From across the room, Clara Hayes watched the woman who had dismantled her world, Sophia Morrison, offer a practiced, demure smile to the judge. Every word from Sophia's lips was a carefully crafted lie, painting Clara as an unhinged, hysterical woman. And as her own lawyer's arguments faltered, as the custody of her son hung by a thread, a primal panic seized her. It was a desperation so profound, so gut-wrenching, that it drove her to do the unthinkable. In the deafening silence of the court, Clara Rose walked to the center of the room and fell to her knees, a wife's ultimate surrender. And from the plaintiff's table, she heard it a soft, triumphant laugh from the mistress, who was about to take everything. The Hayes home on Sycamore Lane was a portrait of suburban success. A two-story colonial with slate blue siding and a porch swing Ethan had installed for their 5th anniversary. Inside the walls were a gallery of Clara's life's work, not just the graphic design projects that paid the bills, but the photos she'd artfully taken and framed. Pictures of their wedding in a Napa vineyard, of their trip to Italy, before the worries of life had fully set in, and dozens, hundreds of their son Daniel. Daniel, with his wild mop of sandy brown hair and Ethan's serious green eyes, was the centerpiece of their universe, the miracle baby they had prayed for through 3 grueling rounds of IVF. To anyone looking in, Clara and Ethan Hayes were the couple who had it all. He was a rising star at a prestigious architecture firm in downtown Boston, his name attached to sleek, innovative new buildings that were reshaping the city's skyline. She was a talented freelance designer with a client list that allowed her the flexibility to be a full-time mother to their 3-year-old son. Their weekends were a comfortable rhythm of farmers' markets, trips to the park, and cozy family movie nights with Daniel nestled between them on their oversized beige sofa. The first crack in this perfect facade was almost imperceptible. It started with the late nights at the office. A new project sweetheart, Ethan, would say, his voice tired over the phone. The deadline is brutal. Clara, ever the supportive wife, would keep his dinner warm, tidying the house so he could come home to a peaceful sanctuary. She understood the pressures of his career. She had always been his biggest cheerleader. But the late nights began to bleed into weekends. Saturday mornings, once reserved for pancake breakfasts with Daniel, were now claimed by emergency meetings and site visits. Ethan grew distant in a way that had nothing to do with physical miles. He'd be present in the room, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd stare at his phone, a faint, unreadable smile on his face, and quickly lock the screen if she walked in. The easy intimacy they once shared, the comfortable silences, the inside jokes were replaced by a tense, polite distance. He stopped asking about her day, his compliments on her new designs ceased, and his goodnight kisses became brief, perfunctory pecks on the cheek. Clara tried to rationalize it. It was stress. The pressure of his job was immense. Men retreat when they're overwhelmed, she told herself, reciting platitudes from marriage articles she'd bookmarked late at night. She suggested a weekend away, just the two of them. He claimed he couldn't possibly get the time off. She tried initiating conversations about their future, about maybe trying for another baby, a topic that had once been their favorite shared dream. He'd just nod vaguely and change the subject. The gnawing suspicion in her gut grew into a persistent, sickening dread. It was a cold weight in her stomach when she found a receipt from a high-end restaurant she'd never been to dated on a night he was supposedly working through dinner. It was a jolt of panic when she did his laundry and found a faint, unfamiliar floral perfume clinging to his shirt collar. She was losing him. Or worse, he was already gone. The night the lie shattered completely began like any other. Ethan had called to say he was stuck in a marathon session with a client and wouldn't be home until after midnight. Clara put Daniel to bed, reading him "Goodnight, Moon." Twice her voice, a soft murmur in the dim light of his room. She lingered by his bedside, stroking his hair, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of him. He was her anchor, her everything. The thought of their perfect family dissolving was a physical pain, a sharp stabbing in her chest. After cleaning the kitchen, she settled onto the sofa with her laptop, trying to lose herself in a new logo design for a local bakery. Around 11 p.m., Ethan's tablet, which was synced to his phone and left on the coffee table, chimed with a new message notification. Ordinarily, she would have ignored it. Privacy had been a cornerstone of their trust. But trust was a luxury she no longer felt she had. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she reached for the device. The screen lit up with a preview of the message. It was from a name she didn't recognize, Sophia Morrison. The message itself was innocuous enough. "Thinking of you. Can't wait for the weekend." But it was the accompanying photo that made the air leave Clara's lungs. It was a selfie of Ethan smiling wider and more freely than she'd seen him smile in months. Beside him was a woman young and beautiful, with long dark hair and bold red lipstick. Her head was resting on his shoulder, her expression possessive and triumphant. They were in a softly lit bar, the kind of intimate, trendy place he used to take Clara on date nights. For a moment, the world went silent and white. Clara couldn't breathe. She clicked on the message thread, her hands shaking so violently she could barely control her fingers. And there it was, months of them. Messages filled with secret codes, pet names, and plans for clandestine meetings. Photos of them at lunches, dinners, and one heart-stoppingly in a hotel room, a bottle of champagne on the bedside table. "Our little secret," one of his messages read. "My escape," said another. The sound that escaped Clara's throat was a raw, wounded cry. The perfect life, the perfect marriage, the perfect family. It was all a meticulously constructed lie. The man she had built her world around had been living a completely separate existence, and she had been the fool keeping the home fires burning for him. When Ethan's car finally pulled into the driveway just after 1 a.m., Clara was sitting in the dark living room, the tablet glowing on the cushion beside her. He walked in humming softly and flicked on the light, his smile faltering when he saw her expression. "Clara, what are you doing sitting in the dark?" he asked, his voice laced with a false nonchalance. She didn't answer. She just tilted the tablet screen towards him. The blood drained from his face. He stared at the screen at the irrefutable proof of his betrayal, and for a fleeting moment she saw panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The architect, the man who could design towering structures of steel and glass, couldn't construct a single sentence to defend himself. "Who is she?" Clara's voice was a dead, hollow whisper. The denial phase was pathetic and brief. "It's not what it looks like. She's just a colleague." "A colleague you take to hotels? A colleague you call your escape?" Clara's voice rose, cracking, with a pain so immense it felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. "How long, Ethan? How long have you been lying to my face every single day?" And then his demeanor shifted. The panic was replaced by a cold, hard resentment, the defiance of a man who had been caught and had decided to stop pretending. "A year," he said, his voice flat. "About a year." A year. For a full year, he had kissed her good morning while planning to meet his lover. For a year, he had held her at night while dreaming of someone else. For a year, every "I love you" had been a lie. She's a junior architect at the firm, he continued as if giving a project report. Her name is Sophia Morrison, the name from the text, the face from the photo, the woman who had been living in the shadows of her marriage. The fight that followed was a storm of grief and fury, a torrent of accusations and cold justifications. He talked about feeling stifled, about the pressure of their life, about how Sophia understood him in a way Clara no longer did. Each word was a dagger twisting in the wound he had created. By dawn, the house that had once been a home felt like a war zone, and the man she had loved for a decade was a stranger with cold, merciless eyes. The perfect life was not just cracked, it had been utterly and irrevocably demolished. The days that followed the revelation were a blur of suffocating silence and explosive, venomous arguments. The air in their beautiful home on Sycamore Lane grew thick with unspoken words and bitter resentments. Clara felt as though she were walking through a dream, a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Every object in the house seemed to mock her. The wedding photos on the mantelpiece were a monument to a lie. The porch swing sat motionless, a symbol of a shared future that no longer existed. Daniel, bless his innocent heart, was the only source of light in the encroaching darkness, but even his presence was tinged with sorrow. How could she explain to her 3-year-old son that his father was breaking their family apart? Ethan moved out a week later. There was no dramatic, tearful goodbye. He packed his suitcases with a chilling efficiency, while Clara watched from the doorway of their bedroom, her arms wrapped around herself as if to hold her fractured pieces together. He didn't look at her. He focused on folding his shirts, on lining up his shoes, his movements precise and detached. It was the same meticulous care he applied to his architectural drawings, only now he was drafting the blueprint for their divorce. "I'll have the rest of my things moved later," he said, his voice devoid of emotion as he wheeled his luggage towards the front door. "My lawyer will be in touch." Lawyer. The word landed like a punch to the gut. The swift, clinical nature of it all was staggering. There was no remorse, no apology, just a sterile transition to the next phase of their separation. He was already gone, already building a new life on the ruins of their old one. The moment the front door clicked shut, a profound silence descended upon the house. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, cavernous void, echoing with the absence of the man she thought she knew. Clara slid down the wall, her body racked with sobs, her grief a physical force that left her breathless. She was alone with Daniel in a house that was now just a collection of memories and mortgages. It didn't take long for Sophia Morrison to step out from the shadows. She was, as Ethan had said, a junior architect at his firm. A quick search online revealed a polished professional profile and a personal social media account that was until recently private. The day after Ethan moved out, Sophia's Instagram account became public. It was a calculated, deliberate act of war. Her feed became a curated gallery of her new life with Ethan, a picture of their hands intertwined across a restaurant table with the caption, "Finally." A selfie of them kissing with the city skyline behind them, captioned, "My view." She posted a photo of Ethan's back as he cooked in a sleek, modern kitchen, her kitchen with the caption, "Someone's spoiling me." Each post was a digital dagger aimed directly at Clara's heart, a public declaration of her victory. She was flaunting her stolen prize, ensuring that Clara and the world knew she had won. Clara's best friend, Maria, was her lifeline. A fiercely loyal and pragmatic lawyer herself, Maria was a whirlwind of action and outrage. "You need to block her, Clara. You can't look at that poison," she'd insist, taking the phone from Clara's trembling hands. "And you need to get your own lawyer, a shark. Ethan is not the man you married anymore. He's her puppet, and she's pulling the strings." Maria was right. The Ethan who initiated the divorce proceedings was a stranger. The initial talk of an amicable split vanished. Influenced by Sophia's ambition and greed, Ethan's demands became increasingly ruthless. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted to win. His lawyer, a sharp-tongued man named Arthur Vance, sent the first volley of legal documents. Ethan was petitioning for the sale of the house, with him receiving the majority of the proceeds, citing a premarital inheritance he'd used for the down payment, an inheritance they had both agreed was a shared investment in their family's future. But the most devastating blow was his petition for primary physical custody of Daniel. The documents were filled with cruel, twisted half-truths. They painted Clara as an emotionally volatile and unstable mother, whose freelance work schedule was inconsistent and unreliable. They suggested that Daniel would be better off in a stable two-person household, meaning with him and Sophia. Reading the words felt like a betrayal on a cellular level. He was using their shared history, her pain, her grief over his infidelity as a weapon against her. He was twisting her love for their son into a weakness, her tears into evidence of instability. It was a character assassination designed to strip her of the one thing that still gave her a reason to get out of bed in the morning, her child. The first mediation session was a disaster. It was held in a sterile conference room with gray walls and a long, polished table that felt a mile wide. Ethan sat beside his lawyer, his jaw set, refusing to make eye contact with Clara. Sophia wasn't present, but her influence was palpable. Every one of Ethan's demands echoed with her ambition. Clara's lawyer, a kind but somewhat timid man named Mr. Henderson, tried to find common ground. "Mr. Hayes, surely you can see that uprooting Daniel from his home and his mother is not in the child's best interest," he argued gently. Arthur Vance scoffed. "What's not in the child's best interest, Mr. Henderson, is being raised by a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. My client is offering stability. He has a steady job, a partner who is eager to help raise Daniel, and the financial means to provide for him. What can Mrs. Hayes offer?" Clara felt a surge of white-hot rage. "I can offer him his mother," she interjected, her voice shaking. "I can offer him the love of the person who carried him, who gave birth to him, who has been there for him every single day of his life. Something your client's new partner knows nothing about." Ethan flinched, but remained silent, letting his lawyer do the talking. The mediation ended with no resolution, only a deepening of the chasm between them. As they were leaving, Clara caught a glimpse of Ethan's phone. His lock screen was a picture of him and Sophia smiling on a beach. The family photo that had occupied that space for 3 years had been erased. The unraveling was swift and brutal. Joint bank accounts were frozen. Credit cards were canceled. Ethan, who had always managed their finances, used his knowledge to his advantage, leaving Clara scrambling to prove her financial contributions to the marriage. He was systematically dismantling their shared life, piece by piece, with the cold precision of an architect demolishing a building to make way for a new one. And through it all, Sophia continued her campaign of psychological warfare. She began to insert herself into Daniel's life during Ethan's visitation weekends. She would post photos of herself with Daniel at the park or the zoo, always with carefully worded captions like, "Making new memories with this little guy," or "My 2 favorite boys." She was rebranding herself not as the woman who broke up a family, but as the loving stepmother stepping in to create a new, better one. One Saturday afternoon, Clara was at the local grocery store when she turned a corner and came face to face with Sophia. She was alone, looking chic and confident in designer jeans and a silk blouse. A smirk played on her lips. "Clara." "I thought that was you," Sophia said, her voice smooth as honey. Clara just stared, her heart pounding. "I just want you to know." Sophia continued, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that I'm taking very good care of him. Both of them. Daniel is such a sweet boy. He's already started calling me Soph. It's adorable." The cruelty was breathtaking. It was a direct, targeted strike meant to wound and destabilize her. Clara, speechless with rage and pain, simply grabbed her cart and walked away, Sophia's soft, satisfied laugh following her down the aisle. The marriage wasn't just unraveling. It was being shredded before her eyes, and the woman holding the scissors was enjoying every single cut. The transition from a broken home to a legal battlefield was stark and unforgiving. Clara found a new lawyer on Maria's recommendation. His name was Robert Peterson, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes that had seen every shade of marital warfare. His office was cluttered with legal books and files, a testament to a long career spent navigating the wreckage of other people's lives. "Let me be frank with you, Clara," Mr. Peterson said during their first meeting, leaning back in his worn leather chair. "This is going to be an ugly fight. They're not just coming for assets, they're coming for your son. Vance is a notorious bulldog, and he's going to use your emotional state against you. Every angry text, every tearful voicemail you've left Ethan, they will frame it as instability. We need to be smarter, colder." His words were a splash of icy water shocking her out of her grief-fueled haze. He was right. Her raw, unfiltered pain was being weaponized. From that day on, she resolved to be different. She would still feel the rage, the sorrow, the betrayal, but she would no longer show it to them. Her fight for Daniel had to be strategic, but Sophia seemed to delight in testing that resolve. Her intrusions became more brazen. A few weeks after their encounter at the grocery store, Clara was at the park with Daniel. It was their favorite spot, a place of happy memories. Suddenly, Sophia appeared jogging along the path in expensive athletic wear. She slowed as she passed, offering a bright, false smile. "What a coincidence," she chirped, her eyes flicking from Clara to Daniel and back again. She didn't stop, but the message was clear: no place was safe. No memory was sacred. She could and would invade every corner of Clara's life. The messages started coming directly to Clara's phone. They were never overtly threatening, but they were dripping with malice. A picture of Daniel on Ethan's shoulders, sent from an unknown number with the caption, "He's so happy with his dad." A photo of a new expensive watch on Ethan's wrist anniversary gift. 1 year of real happiness. Each message was a carefully calculated pinprick designed to keep her off balance, to fuel the very instability they planned to use against her in court. Clara, following Mr. Peterson's advice, didn't respond. She saved every message, every screenshot of Sophia's goading social media posts, and forwarded them to him. She began keeping a detailed journal documenting every interaction, every change she noticed in Daniel after his weekends with his father. And there were changes. Her sweet, open-hearted boy started coming home quieter, more withdrawn. He would have nightmares. Once he asked her, "Mommy, are you sad because you don't have a new house like Daddy and Sophia?" Another time he mentioned that Aunt Sophia said his old toys were for babies and bought him new, more expensive ones. It was a subtle but insidious campaign of parental alienation, positioning Clara's life as lacking and sad, and their new life as exciting and superior. The lowest point came when Mr. Vance filed a formal motion requesting Clara undergo a mandatory psychological evaluation. The motion was a masterpiece of legal cruelty, weaving her desperate voicemails and grief into a narrative of a woman on the brink of a complete mental collapse. It cited her erratic behavior and obsessive communications, claiming she was an unfit parent whose emotional turmoil was actively harming her son. Reading the document felt like being flayed alive. They were using her love and her pain to argue that she was crazy. They were trying to strip her of her credibility, her sanity, and ultimately her child. Maria sat with her as she read it, her own eyes blazing with fury. "This is a tactic, Clara Maria," said, her voice firm. "A disgusting, scorched earth tactic. They want to break you before you even set foot in the courtroom. You can't let them." Clara knew Maria was right, but the weight of the attack was crushing. She felt exhausted down to her very bones. It was a war on two fronts: the emotional battle of her heartbreak and the cold procedural war of the legal system. She spent her days trying to be a cheerful, stable mother for Daniel, creating a bubble of normalcy for him with finger painting and story times. But at night, after he was asleep, the fear and anxiety would creep in, suffocating her. She would sit in the silent house, scrolling through old photos of her family, her real family, and wonder how it had all gone so terribly wrong. Mr. Peterson prepared her for the evaluation. "Be honest, but be calm. Don't rail against Ethan or Sophia. Talk about your son. Talk about your love for him. Focus on your plans for the future, for providing a stable home. Let the psychiatrist see the mother, not just the scorned wife." Clara followed his instructions, sitting in a sterile office and speaking to a kind-faced woman who asked probing questions about her childhood, her marriage, and her emotional state. She spoke of the shock and grief of the betrayal, but she constantly steered the conversation back to Daniel, to her unwavering commitment to his well-being. She left the appointment feeling drained and exposed, with no idea if she had helped or hurt her own case. As the court date loomed, the storm gathered its full force. Mr. Peterson prepped her for what was to come. "Sophia will take the stand. She will be calm, poised, and sympathetic. She will play the part of the reluctant homewrecker who fell in love and is now trying to protect a child from his unstable mother. Vance will paint you as the villain. You cannot react. No outbursts, no tears. You must be a stone wall. Do you understand?" Clara nodded, her throat tight. A stone wall. It felt impossible. Her heart was a raw, open wound, and they were about to pour salt all over it in a public forum. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She crept into Daniel's room and watched him sleep, his small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. His face was a perfect, innocent blend of hers and Ethan's. He was the best part of both of them. She knelt by his bed, her hand resting lightly on his back, and made a silent vow. She would not let them take him. She would walk through fire. She would endure any humiliation, but she would not lose her son. She had no idea that the next day would demand a level of humiliation she could never have imagined. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The courtroom was exactly as Clara had imagined, it cold, intimidating, and smelling faintly of old paper and stale coffee. The wood was dark and heavy, the ceilings oppressively high. It was a place designed to make people feel small and insignificant. On one side of the room sat Ethan and his lawyer, Arthur Vance. Ethan stared straight ahead, his face a mask of grim determination. Beside him, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that screamed quiet confidence, was Sophia. She looked directly at Clara, a flicker of a triumphant smile gracing her lips before she turned her attention to the front. Clara sat beside Mr. Peterson, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She had chosen her own outfit with painstaking care, a simple gray dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back neatly. She wanted to look composed, stable. The very opposite of the hysterical woman they were portraying her to be. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Albright with sharp, intelligent eyes, entered the room, and the proceedings began. Arthur Vance opened his case with brutal efficiency. He painted a picture of Ethan as a dedicated father, a man who had tried to leave a toxic and volatile marriage with grace, only to be met with the unhinged harassment of his estranged wife. He presented phone records of Clara's late-night calls to Ethan. He read aloud transcripts of tearful, angry voicemails she had left in the raw, early days of the separation. Out of context, stripped of the agony that had produced them, her words sounded desperate and frantic. Clara felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck, but she kept her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, remembering Mr. Peterson's words, "Be a stone wall." Then Sophia Morrison was called to the stand. She moved with a fluid grace, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She took the oath, her voice clear and steady. Under Vance's gentle questioning, she was the image of poise and reason. She described her relationship with Ethan not as a sordid affair, but as a deep intellectual and emotional connection that had blossomed under difficult circumstances. She spoke of her love for him, and her voice softening with feigned maternal warmth her growing affection for Daniel. "It was never my intention to cause anyone pain," she said, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a delicate finger. "I fell in love with a wonderful man who was deeply unhappy. And now all I want is to help him provide a stable, loving, and peaceful home for his son." Then Vance turned to Clara's behavior. "Ms. Morrison, have you had any direct interactions with Mrs. Hayes?" "A few," Sophia said, her expression turning somber. "She has confronted me in public, and I receive messages. It's been very difficult. I worry about the effect her anger might have on Daniel. It was a masterful performance. She was calm, sympathetic, and utterly believable. She was everything Clara was not in that moment: composed, confident, and in control. Clara could feel the judge's gaze on her, assessing, comparing the two women. When Mr. Peterson had his chance to cross-examine, he did his best to poke holes in her story. He brought up her social media posts, her calculated public displays. Sophia answered each question with unshakable calm. "I was just sharing my happiness," she said innocently. "I didn't realize it would be misinterpreted." She was Teflon. Nothing stuck. By the time she stepped down, she had successfully painted herself as the victim and Clara as the aggressor. The air in the room felt heavy, the odds stacking ever higher against Clara. The final blow came when Vance called a child behavior specialist to the stand, a specialist hired by them. The woman spoke in clinical detached terms about the potential damage a child can suffer when exposed to a parent's emotional dysregulation. While she never mentioned Clara by name, the implication was clear and devastating. Vance concluded his argument by looking directly at the judge. "Your Honor, we are not trying to take a child from his mother. We are trying to place that child in the safest, most stable environment possible. The evidence clearly shows that at this time that environment is with his father. We believe Mrs. Hayes's continued emotional outbursts and instability present a clear and present danger to Daniel's well-being." A danger. The word echoed in Clara's head. A danger. They were saying her love, her grief, her very essence as a mother was a threat to her own child. Something inside her snapped. The carefully constructed stone wall crumbled into dust. All the pain, the fear, the sleepless nights, the public humiliation, and the fierce primal love for her son coalesced into a single, overwhelming wave of pure panic. She saw her future spooling out in front of her, a life of scheduled visitations, of missed milestones, of her son being raised by the woman who had destroyed her family. She was losing. In the cold, impartial calculus of the law, her raw human heart was a liability. She had nothing left to fight with, no more evidence, no more clever arguments. All she had was the terrifying, desperate love of a mother about to lose her child. Before Mr. Peterson could restrain her, Clara stood up. The room fell silent. Every eye was on her. She took a step, then another, moving from behind the defendant's table into the open space in the center of the courtroom. Ethan stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Vance looked annoyed. Mr. Peterson whispered her name, a sharp, urgent command to sit down, but she didn't hear him. Her gaze was fixed on Judge Albright, and then she did the unthinkable. In an act of ultimate, raw, unscripted desperation, Clara Hayes sank to her knees on the cold, hard floor of the courtroom. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The gesture said everything. It was a plea, a surrender, a silent scream for mercy. It was the last desperate act of a woman with nothing left to lose. A gasp rippled through the small public gallery. Judge Albright's face was a mask of stunned disbelief. Ethan looked down at his hands, a faint flush of what might have been shame coloring his neck. And from the plaintiff's table a sound cut through the thick, shocked silence. It was a laugh. It was quiet, almost a snort of air, but in the pin-drop silence, it was as loud as a gunshot. It was Sophia. She had brought a hand to her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking with suppressed mirth. She was laughing at the pathetic, kneeling wife. She saw Clara's ultimate degradation not as a moment of human tragedy, but as the final confirmation of her victory. The sound of that laugh pierced through Clara's panic-stricken haze. She looked over at Sophia, at the cruel, triumphant smirk she was failing to hide. And in that moment, kneeling on the courtroom floor, stripped of all her dignity, Clara felt a new emotion begin to smolder beneath the fear and despair, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. Sophia had won the battle, but Clara would be damned if she let her win the war. All rise, the bailiff's voice boomed, shattering the tense tableau. Judge Albright, her face a thunderous mask, stood abruptly. This court is in recess for 30 minutes. Counsel will meet me in my chambers. Now. She swept from the room, her black robes billowing behind her, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The moment the judge was gone, Mr. Peterson was at Clara's side, his hand on her arm, helping her to her feet. His face was a mixture of fury and pity. Clara, what in God's name were you thinking? He hissed, his voice low and urgent. Clara's legs felt like jelly. The adrenaline that had propelled her to the floor had vanished, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep humiliation. The image of Sophia's laughing face was seared into her mind. I didn't know what else to do, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. They were saying I was a danger to him, Robert. A danger. Across the room, Ethan wouldn't meet her eyes. He was having a hushed, frantic conversation with Arthur Vance, who kept glancing over at Clara with undisguised contempt. Sophia stood beside them, her composure regained, but the smug satisfaction in her eyes remained. She had witnessed Clara's complete breakdown, and she was savoring it. When Mr. Peterson returned from the judge's chambers 20 minutes later, his expression was grim. Well, you certainly made an impression, he said, slumping into the chair beside her. Judge Albright is displeased with everyone. She saw your desperation, but she also saw it as an act of profound instability in a formal setting. And for what it's worth, she was not amused by Ms. Morrison's reaction either. When the court reconvened, Judge Albright's demeanor was glacial. She peered down from her bench, her gaze sweeping over them all with equal measures of disappointment. "This court is not a theater for personal dramas," she began, her voice sharp and clear. "What I have witnessed today is a family in a catastrophic state of crisis. My sole concern now and always is the well-being of the child Daniel Hayes." Clara held her breath. Given the conflicting testimony and the emotional displays, I am not prepared to make a final ruling on permanent custody today. Instead, I am issuing a temporary order. Custody of the minor child will be shared 50-50 between the two parents on a week-to-week basis. Furthermore, Mrs. Hayes, the judge's eyes locked onto hers, you will complete the court-mandated psychological evaluation as requested. I am also ordering mandatory co-parenting counseling for both Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. We will reconvene in 4 months, at which time I will review the psychiatrist's report, the counselor's report, and make a permanent determination. Until then, I expect you all to behave like adults, for the sake of your son. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a deafening crack. It wasn't a total loss, but it felt like one. She hadn't lost Daniel completely, but she had lost half of him. Half of his nights would be spent in that woman's house. Half of his life would be lived under her influence. And Clara herself was now under a court-ordered microscope, her sanity officially in question. As they filed out of the courtroom, she saw Ethan and Sophia embracing. Sophia glanced over Ethan's shoulder at Clara, her expression one of pure, unadulterated victory. She had gotten exactly what she wanted, a legal foothold in Daniel's life. The days following the hearing were some of the darkest of Clara's life. The humiliation of kneeling on that floor played on a loop in her mind. She felt stripped bare, pathetic. She had given them the exact ammunition they wanted, confirming their narrative of her as an unhinged woman. She barely ate sleep, was a stranger, and the big house on Sycamore Lane felt more like a mausoleum than ever before. Maria refused to let her wallow. She showed up one evening with 2 large pizzas and a bottle of wine, practically kicking the door down. She found Clara on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at a television that wasn't even on. "Okay, that's enough," Maria said, setting the food down on the coffee table. "The pity party is officially over. You hear me?" "They won, Maria," Clara said, her voice hollow. "I fell to my knees in front of all those people and she just laughed. And the judge thinks I'm crazy." "No," Maria said, sitting beside her and forcing a slice of pizza into her hand. "They didn't win. They got a temporary order. And that laugh is her weakness. Pride, arrogance. She thinks she's already won, so she's going to get sloppy. You, on the other hand, have hit rock bottom. And you know what they say about rock bottom?" Clara looked at her friend, a flicker of life in her exhausted eyes. "There's nowhere to go. But up," Maria finished. "You knelt. It was your lowest point. You will never be that powerless again. From now on, you fight smart. You do the evaluation, you go to the counseling, and you are the most stable, boring, by-the-book co-parent this world has ever seen. You document everything, and you wait for her to overplay her hand. Because she will." Maria's words were a lifeline. She was right. The kneeling had been a moment of utter surrender, but it could also be a turning point. It was the death of the old Clara, the pleading, heartbroken wife. In her place, a new Clara had to be born, a patient, meticulous, and resilient mother. A new resolve began to take root. She would not let them break her. She scheduled her evaluation determined to prove her sanity. She found the court-appointed co-parenting counselor. She prepared herself for the first custody exchange the moment she would have to hand her son over to his father, knowing he would be spending the night under Sophia's roof. On Sunday evening, Ethan's car pulled up. Clara had packed Daniel's little dinosaur suitcase with his favorite pajamas, his toothbrush, and his well-loved stuffed giraffe, Jerry. She knelt down and hugged her son tightly, her heart aching. "Mommy loves you more than all the stars in the sky," she whispered into his hair. "I love you too, Mommy," he said, hugging her back. She walked him to the door where Ethan was waiting. Ethan's face was unreadable. He took the suitcase without a word. As Daniel was about to get in the car, the passenger door opened, and Sophia leaned out, a brilliant smile on her face. "Hi, sweetie. Ready to come have some fun at our house?" she said, her voice syrupy, sweet. Daniel hesitated, looking back at Clara. She gave him a small, reassuring smile, though it felt like her face might crack. "Go on, honey. Have a good time with Daddy." She watched the car pull away, a visceral, physical pain ripping through her. But as she closed the door on her empty, silent house, it wasn't just despair she felt. It was a glimmer of something else. Hope. It was a tiny, fragile flame, but it was there. The battle was far from over, but the rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a sprint of raw emotion. It was a marathon of strategy and endurance. And Clara Hayes was determined to run it. The next 4 months were an exercise in excruciating self-control. Life settled into a jarring new rhythm, dictated by the custody schedule. One week the house was filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of a 3-year-old, the sound of toy trucks crashing, of Peppa Pig on the television, of Daniel's infectious giggles. The next week, it was plunged into an unnerving silence that Clara had to fill with work phone calls with Maria and the endless, meticulous task of documentation. She followed Mr. Peterson's and Maria's advice to the letter. Her journal became her confidant, a place to pour out the frustrations she could no longer show the world. In it, she recorded every detail, every time Ethan was late for a drop-off, every passive-aggressive comment Sophia made during the brief, tense exchanges, and most importantly, every change she observed in Daniel. The changes were subtle at first. After his weeks with Ethan and Sophia, Daniel would be clingy and anxious for a day or two. He started mentioning Aunt Sophia with increasing frequency. "Aunt Sophia says I shouldn't eat so many cookies, or I'll get fat," he reported one day, pushing away the chocolate chip cookie Clara had just baked for him. Another time, while they were playing, he built a house with his Lego blocks. "This is Daddy's new house," he announced. "It's bigger than this one. Aunt Sophia says it's a winner's house." Each comment was a tiny, poisoned dart. Sophia was not just playing house with Ethan. She was actively trying to reprogram her son, positioning herself and Ethan as the aspirational superior parents. The co-parenting counseling sessions were a farce. Ethan attended them physically, but his mind was elsewhere. He recited platitudes about wanting what's best for Daniel, but his answers were hollow and rehearsed. He deflected any serious discussion of Sophia's role, claiming Clara was obsessed and paranoid. The counselor, a weary woman who had seen it all, made copious notes, but offered little hope for a breakthrough. Meanwhile, Clara passed her psychological evaluation with flying colors. The report described her as a resilient and dedicated mother experiencing appropriate situational distress in response to significant marital betrayal and a high-conflict divorce. It found no evidence of any underlying personality disorder or pathology that would impair her parenting abilities. It was a significant victory, a piece of official paper that refuted their entire narrative of her being unstable. As the weeks turned into months, Clara began to notice cracks in the perfect facade Ethan and Sophia presented to the world. The fantasy of a glamorous new life was beginning to collide with the mundane reality of co-parenting a toddler. Ethan, who had always had Clara to manage the difficult parts of parenting, the tantrums, the picky eating, the sleepless nights from bad dreams, now had to face them with Sophia, who possessed none of a mother's ingrained patience. During one handover, Clara overheard a snippet of conversation from their car. Sophia's voice was sharp, laced with an impatience she usually kept hidden. "Ethan, I told you he needs a haircut. He looks shaggy. It's embarrassing." It was a small thing, but it revealed a focus on appearances over the gentle realities of raising a child. Another time, Ethan called her a rare occurrence. His voice was strained. "Did Daniel have his stuffed giraffe with him? We can't find it and he's having a meltdown." "Jerry is his favorite," Clara said calmly. "He can't sleep without him. He was definitely in his bag when I dropped him off." There was a muffled sound of Sophia in the background. "For God's sake, it's just a toy. Tell him to be a big boy." Clara's blood ran cold. She heard Ethan sigh a sound of deep weariness. "Okay, well, we'll keep looking," he said, and hung up. Clara saw it then. Ethan had traded a real, if sometimes messy, family life for a sleek, polished illusion. He had been drawn to Sophia's ambition and glamour, her uncomplicated adoration. But Sophia hadn't signed up to be a mother. She had signed up to be the victor, the prize-winning new wife of a successful architect. The day-to-day grind of tantrums over lost toys and resistance to haircuts was not part of her fantasy. The reality of a child's needs was beginning to tarnish the shine of her victory. The slow turning of the tide culminated on Daniel's 4th birthday. They had agreed to a joint party at a local play gym, a carefully negotiated neutral ground. It was an unbearably tense affair. Clara's family and friends gathered on one side of the room, while Ethan's colleagues and Sophia's friends occupied the other. Sophia was in her element, playing the perfect hostess and doting stepmom-to-be. She had organized a lavish, professionally made cake in the shape of a rocket ship and had bought Daniel an enormous, expensive, remote-controlled car that was far too advanced for him. She flitted about taking photos, her smile dazzlingly bright. Clara, meanwhile, focused solely on Daniel. She helped him climb the play structure, went down the slide with him, and sat with him and his little friends while they ate pizza. She gave him her gift, a simple, beautifully illustrated book of classic fairy tales, and a promise to read one to him every single night. He hugged the book to his chest, his eyes shining. The moment of truth came when it was time to cut the cake. Everyone gathered around the table singing happy birthday. Daniel, perched on a chair between Ethan and Clara, beamed with delight. After he blew out the candles, Sophia leaned in close, her arm draped possessively around Ethan's shoulder. "Make a wish, sweetie," she cooed. Then, positioning herself for a photo, she said, "Give your new mommy a big birthday kiss." A hush fell over the immediate area. Daniel looked at Sophia, his expression one of pure confusion. He then looked at Clara, his brow furrowed. He seemed to be processing the word. "New mommy." He turned back to Sophia, who was still smiling, her face expectant. Daniel shook his head slowly. "You're not my mommy," he said, his little voice clear and unwavering. "Mommy is my mommy." He then leaned over and gave Clara a loud, smacking kiss on the cheek. The air crackled with tension. Sophia's smile froze on her face, a brittle, painted-on thing. For a fraction of a second, her mask of sweet perfection slipped, revealing a flash of raw fury and humiliation in her eyes. She quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. "Oh, you silly goose," she said, ruffling his hair a little too roughly. But the damage was done. Several people had heard. Clara saw Ethan's face tighten, a muscle jumping in his jaw. It was a public rejection, a child's simple, honest truth, cutting through all of Sophia's carefully constructed fiction. For the first time, Clara felt a surge of genuine power. She hadn't needed to say a word. Her son had said it all for her. The tide wasn't just turning. It was beginning to flow back in her favor. The day of the final hearing, Clara felt a quiet resolve. The lawyers presented their cases, but the tide had already turned, bolstered by Clara's favorable psychological evaluation and her meticulous documentation of Sophia's manipulative behavior. The true verdict, however, was delivered not by the judge, but by Daniel himself in the hallway outside the courtroom. As they waited for the final ruling, Sophia knelt before the boy, her arms open wide in a performative gesture. "Come on, sweetie pie," she purred, her smile wide and camera-ready. "Come to mommy." The audacious claim hung in the air. Daniel froze, his 4-year-old face a mask of confusion. He looked from Sophia's expectant smile to his mother's steady presence. Then, with devastating clarity, he took a step back toward Clara. "No," he said, his voice unwavering. "Your Aunt Sophia." He then pointed a small finger directly at Clara. "That's my mommy." The words shattered Sophia's composure, her smile collapsing into a flash of raw fury. Ethan watched the fight, visibly draining from him, as the lie of his new life crumbled. When they were called back inside, the judge's ruling was a formality. She awarded sole physical custody to Clara, with a stern warning about respecting parental bonds. Clara felt not triumph, but profound release. Ethan was a study in defeat, while Sophia was left with nothing but the bitter taste of a victory stolen by a child's simple, unwavering truth. A year later, the house on Sycamore Lane was sold, and Clara and Daniel moved into a bright, cozy townhouse closer to the city. Her design business was thriving, and the sounds of laughter and life once again filled her home. The scars of her ordeal remained, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of her own resilience. Ethan was still with Sophia, but from what Clara heard through mutual acquaintances, their relationship was a brittle, strained affair, haunted by the ghost of what they had destroyed. The triumphant laughter that once echoed in a silent courtroom had long since faded, replaced by the quiet, enduring truth of a child's love. Clara had knelt in desperation, but she had risen with a strength she never knew she possessed, proving that a mother's love, when pushed to the brink, is the most formidable force of all. If this story of resilience and a mother's unbreakable bond resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. What part of Clara's journey moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful real-life dramas to light. Thank you for listening.